I'm from Australia. I live in Norway. Super passionate about DevOps and programming, and here I am in Lithuania. Well, it is about DevOps, absolutely, and mostly it's about the journey that the sort of large enterprises have to go through. It's pretty interesting, I think.
Yep, everyone hears me okay? Good morning. My name is Yves. I am the, yes. I'm the principal architect in Circle K. In Vilnius, or in Lithuania, I believe we were currently known as Statoil Fuel and Retail. Just coming out of Martin's talk, I think is really interesting because it is sort of a follow-up to if your enterprise decides to take the big leap of faith, and you do have a strategic mandate to do DevOps and do transformation, then this is kind of what you will be experiencing. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. So one of the reasons sort of why your company or your big, large enterprises might be wanting to do this is because by 2020, they're really, really scared that they're going to disappear. And 2020 is 3 years away. But to sort of set the scene, I work for a fuel and retail company. We sell fuel, we used to drill for fuel, and it is an industry that hasn't seen much disruption at all. If you take a look at, this is a picture taken exactly 100 years ago, a petrol station is basically comprised of a pump. You have fuel, you get some fuel. And that hasn't really changed. And today, and very soon in Lithuania, you will see this, Circle K, is really not that much different from 100 years ago. Yes, we might have IT systems, we might have a POS. There's this thing called IFSF for forecourt controllers. I mean, there are electronics and IT systems, but essentially, you drive in, you fuel, you drive out. It's the same 100 years ago and now. And part of the reason why we're kind of freaking out, or the corporation is stuff like this. Then you have these cool cats with their electrical cars. You're not really driving in and fueling anymore. You're kind of just hanging out and doing the world a favor. And I really like that personally, just want to say that. But the company is worried. What would this mean for our bottom line? Then you have these guys who seriously don't even need a POS. You literally walk in, take stuff out, and you get an invoice. This is great. Great retail experience. And this is where the panic really sets in. So then, brace yourselves, the winter is coming. So the board of directors are sort of panicking a little bit, or quite a lot actually. And when I was hired about 2.5, 3 years ago, I said the winter is already here. If you're not doing something about it, be prepared to go and disappear. And luckily we have done stuff to hopefully, for our survival, let's just call it that. But before we get into that, I live in Norway, in this lovely place called Oslo. Initially, I come from Perth. I'm from Australia. And I've been an open source guy. Been a sort of, before working for this giant enterprise, I worked for a open source startup, Varnish Software, and I'm heavily involved in the Jenkins community. And from this angle is sort of where we start our enterprise transformation. And absolutely, I'm passionate about DevOps and automation. So, what do I bring, and what was the tactic? So the mandate is we need to ship once a month, as Martin said. We need to ship regularly, we need we need to cost cut, we need to be lean, we need to be, save here and there, whatever. Okay, well, these are the changes we can believe in, and this is what we're going to do. We're going to talk about DevOps culture, how we bring that forward into an enterprise. We're going to talk about how we introduce automation to help drive quality, or what we call technical excellence. and deployment. And of course, companies, they literally need to do this thing called the digital transformation, right? So everything they want to do is digital. How do we make a petrol station digital? I don't know, but you could do some stuff like, well, anyway, I have no idea. But if you have an idea, we're going to build it with cloud native architecture. Let's just say that's super cool and low cost. And we're going to do and sort of talk about how you could do this centralized transformation for yourselves. So the journey begins. We have this sort of startup mentality sort of introduced into status fuel retail, and we're really worried about disruptions, and people are really getting scared about open source, and there's systems and people, and it's a lot of fear, and it's not good. But along came this guy, which I sort of quoted in a few strategic meetings, like, it's all right, if banks are doing it, we should be doing the same. And in fact, insurance companies are doing this, and they're like the slowest of all slows. So we're in a good place. We can do this. Bank is IT, IT is bank, and I think that statement is simple and it's true. Your tactic is essentially invest in IT. But what's an enterprise IT? I think Martin covered a lot, but for us, this is sort of our characteristics, and I think is sort of shared amongst a lot of people here as well. Fact number one, if you're an enterprise IT and you feel like you are an enterprise IT, you have a lot of meetings. There's a lot of processes, there's a lot of shifts, but there's absolutely hardly anybody doing any coding or any sort of deployment. Literally, you're just talking about PowerPoints, kind of what I'm doing right now. Fact number two, we love buzzwords. You want to get funding for stuff, blockchains, funding, buzzwords. That's what people want. It's really weird. And we're not sort of, free from this sin either. One of my favorite heroes, Kelsey Hightower, totally said these buzzwords, and I think it's awesome. And I will just have a quick shout out to my team in the back that we are going to do no ops and serverless, hopefully this year, which is really strange as well, but super cool. Fact number three, and this one is actually very real, and people are genuinely worried about this. Your current IT investment portfolio is not going to disappear. You have written long contracts to lock yourselves in, and they don't just go away. Fact number four, you could build cloud native apps. I mean, literally, you can, the Martins and the sort of the Russian DevOps consulting gig, you go in and say, I want to buy DevOps, help me buy this stuff. Yeah, but then your organization is not going to know how to sort of bring that in-house. You don't have the culture to nurture it. You don't know what to do with it. And of course, everything you build will be dependent on the old monoliths. And there's nothing you can do about it. At most, you can approach it like this. And this is kind of how we started as well. It's not the prettiest place, but at least we have some sort of separation. UI, there is some separation of business logic, and then you have to talk to some ERP, CRM, because that's what we do. It's a little sad, and you can see deploying this is really difficult. You have to, go at it from multiple angles, multiple system gets deployed, there's stuff in the cloud and there's stuff on-prem. Very tricky. And often in our management meetings, we say, yep, we are screwed. Yes, we remind ourselves regularly. Yes, we are. But we were hired 3 years ago to sort of save the day. And we first started off with how do we tackle this problem? Yes, we know we're screwed. We don't need to sort of reiterate it. But incidentally, Gartner had this sort of interesting insight where they say you could split up your IT portfolio into 3 categories. Each of them will have its own life cycles. And if you think about system of record being your legacies, your CRM, ERPs, POS, you don't need to change them very often. You don't want to change them very often. And then you have your current a competitive advantage, which is known as your system differentiation. This is your differentiator. This is what makes you different from anybody else, and it's your current competitive advantage. there you need to sort of take care of it, have those release cycles, regular updates, and try to sort of bring that forward to a lower cost and more lean operations. And then you have your new ideas, and this is where it's interesting. These ideas probably don't exist, and this is where you should start. So we talked about how do you convince your management to have this mandate, to have a strategic approach. Well, start with the system of innovation. Whatever it is they want to do, say, yeah, you could do it, but we're going to start doing DevOps just for that and try to introduce it that way. And that's what we did. And it's called piecemealing. This is a very typical idea. You go enter an organization, you don't try to do and scare everybody into a big bang rollout. You try to sort of sneak your way in with bits and bits, and all of a sudden, you have your enterprise transformation. So, to go into details now, we're going to take a giant leap of faith. And of course, we've been sort of keeping an eye out as to technically how do we do this. We hear a lot about Kubernetes, Elastic Beanstalk, Mesos, and all that. How do we actually introduce these items technically, and how do we address system innovation and differentiators? Luckily, there was this KubeCon. Love Kubernetes. I think it's a great take. But anyway, in this conference, they said you could decompose all existing enterprise apps into microservices. So this is massively popular amongst developers, I myself included. That we want to build microservices. We want to make lots of APIs, API all the things, as if you will. But all the existing enterprise apps, you're going to have a bad time. There's no business case for it. Your managers will be angry, like, why are you wasting our time? Well, your option number 2 is to say, well, we're going to build new things. There will be some API, but it's not going to be so micro, so don't worry, don't freak out. But we're going to try to use continuous integration, continuous deployment, tooling, and platforms with this sort of hybrid architecture. So there's some buzzwords there. They're going to have the biggest smile on their face. Oh, that means you're not going to screw with our BI system. Sounds all right. Yeah, and that's what we're going to talk about today. One thing to note is, I just throw it in there, that there's this thing called a platform that understands mixed era apps. That's a Prenda thing. No idea. We don't use it, but check it out. So we're going to explore option 2, and this is your traditional pipeline. We're talking about Jenkins. We're talking about shipping software. Happy days. So our system of innovation kind of looks like this. We do have a lot of things in on-prem, and it was a process of moving into the cloud. And those that are familiar, it is about costs. But fundamentally, you can't possibly move everything. You need to split them up. And we knew that. So we selected a handful of interesting, sort of innovative APIs and UIs that makes an application. And we start pulling them out or building them from scratch. And they will live in AWS. They will start talking into interesting NoSQL database where appropriate. And we start pulling in the APIs together, kind of like this. We chose Elastic Beanstalk as the Docker container sort of technology of choice. And on our on-prem side, we picked Kubernetes because Elastic Beanstalk is kind of Amazon only. We can sort of argue for days why we didn't go Kubernetes in the cloud. I don't know. Anyway, let's not talk about that. But why Elastic Beanstalk? And I think this is interesting because if you're starting to do this, you don't have a giant team readily available. Your developers are your sysadmins. They need to ship and sort of illustrate that they can do this. And Elastic Beanstalk basically is an EC2 instance with Docker and Nginx. If you think about it like that, is pretty flexible. So we deploy Docker images, or we specify them in Docker files. There's not much difference there. And every time you spin up new Elastic Beanstalk, you get Elastic Load Balance, and that's where its magic elasticity comes in. It is also a highly available platform, as it says, but there are some fallbacks. But what we can do is this notion of rolling updates, right? You could sort of go to your business units and say, you have an API that does a whole bunch of stuff, and I need to speed up, and you get zero downtime. So why Kubernetes? It has 10 years of Google R&D tech. It's awesome. It's not built by a single vendor, community driven, and it makes really good use of legacy hardware. And I think it's worthwhile checking out as well for your on-prem systems. Yeah. But we also found that if you try to introduce all these new technologies and tooling into an existing infrastructure team that doesn't care for these things, you're going to run into some trouble. We've even had examples where we have Docker containers where people are trying to deploy them manually, and we're going to eventually land in hundreds of these APIs and containers. And to do this without any sort of orchestration is really stupid. So it looks a bit like this. So I'm not pleased. And here we introduce the notion of build pipeline. Yes, you might not have a big enough team to support the deployment process, but you could certainly use a robot or Jenkins. So what it does for us, and when I wrote this slide, I was a Jenkins 1.0 user. Today we've upgraded to 2.0. Big shout out to Bart, and now it's super sweet. What we do is test automation, static code analysis. All our quality attributes lives inside Jenkins. On top of that, we have a repeatable build pipeline. What we also introduced during the time is your organization have sort of lots of hang-ups on things called test, QA, staging, production, whatever. Introduce new terms so it doesn't confuse people. Well, it might just confuse them more, but then you know what you are talking about. So we have introduced this notion of test/dev or kitchen that goes into prep, and then you go bring it out to the shop. Our team, we knew at the time exactly what that meant, but I think now it's also getting a bit confusing. And I personally believe in packaging. I think packaging is really important. I think everyone should stop writing docker entry.sh and start using packaging and build binaries. And our Jenkins kind of looked a bit like this in the beginning. Yeah, so it's kind of stock standard. It's quite nice. But it did have an interesting birth, let's call it that. We hit the whiteboard, drew a bunch of boxes and go, we should do this. Our test, we're going to split it out like this. We're going to parallelize these and fork and join these build pipelines. And this was at a time, Jenkins, a build pipeline was not a first-class citizen in the Jenkins world. We very quickly realized in order to build a great build pipeline that works, you need to be able to test it. So testing the build pipeline is something I highly recommend doing. You must do this. And because if you don't, you're going to have a bad time. So I recommend using a DSL for Jenkins 2. I think the boys and girls up the back likes Groovy. I like YAML, so I'm a big fan of Python Jenkins Job Builder. And I'm saying it now, stating it as a fact. And to get started, it's always good to have Jenkins and Vagrant to sort of help that testing process. You can spin up your own and put in your pipeline and just run it and make sure all the stages are sort of executing fine. And then in Jenkins 1 world, you'll get something like this. And this is a picture of how we ship some of the Varnish products, where we go through series of performance tests. We, at the time, would sort of bombard this little application with HTTP requests, and then it's all green, and then we ship a new version. It's great. Not quite the same in Circle K. But we are doing one thing that's also a bit interesting. I think it's, for me personally, I think I'm a big fan of chat ops. I think it's great. I spend most of my time on Slack. I think it's making me less productive than, I think I'm actually losing more focus every day, just hanging out on Slack, talking shit all day is really great. But we are informed when things don't work. We have integrated Jenkins with Slack. We have a Slack bot that I wrote that kind of works and kind of doesn't, that can sort of rebuild all our containers. We can ship stuff. It's an interesting way to work, and I highly recommend at least exploring it. Other companies such as New York Times and sort of media industry, they use chat ops a lot, probably. And we sort of follow from that footstep and that thinking. So now that you have a mandate, you're piecemealing everything, you're building all your new systems in this native, cloud-native application, you have a build pipeline that works really well and it's Jenkins, all your developers are chatting away on Slack, and you're inviting the business people, your product owners, your project, your purse string holders, into Slack and sort of get in on the action as well. Does that mean you win? Have you done DevOps? In my opinion, almost. The key ingredient, I think, this is the common red thread in this conference, is you need your people. You can't do DevOps without people that you either have insourced or hopefully now outsource, like the Russian example, go and buy DevOps. No, you need to have people that drives the culture from a ground up. You need to have people that can make these changes top down and bottom up from the organization. So I believe it's not enough that us as techies are challenging the business units. I think we should say flat out no to the business units because they need us more than we need them. And I believe also that it's nice that we've been very lucky to have this mandate to run the way we have run. So hopefully you will all experience the same thing, and it's absolutely fantastic. But people is your number one asset, and you should take care of them. And we call them the Avengers or the Shield because we're kind of the everyday superhero type. So we're not really professionals, nor amateurs. Maybe more amateurs. Our findings is this. Right now, we're sitting on fairly complex deployments between cloud native and on-prem. Our application portfolio is moving towards we have a lot of compliance issues. And when you deal with compliance, they haven't really reached the DevOps world. We don't know how to say entirely, Netflix has done SOX and DevOps and have this super nice automated deployment of their things. We don't know if we can do the same. I believe we can, but we don't know technically how to approach it because it is sort of an interesting area where people have to come and audit you, and there's no saying they would just say, no, that's crap. But anyway, that's our findings. We are going to continue doing this. Monitoring and logging can be fairly difficult to consolidate between on-prem, what we call the multi-era apps. If something does go wrong, is it in your on-prem data center, or is it in AWS, or is it in Google Cloud? It is a little tricky. So spend some time on that. We potentially have this microservice landscape, and I think microservices are sort of losing its flavor in a month. Yeah, it was cool, but it is difficult to if you have more than a handful, how do each of them talk to each other? Do you need an API gateway? How do you secure this? Authentication, authorization, blah, 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 blah. This goes on. And then you have the monolithic dependency. So your portfolio, such as the horrible ERP you bought, is not going away. So that's a fact. We just have to live with that. Our final finding is our team, whom we love very much, is moving towards a polyglot tooling. And that scares, it doesn't scare me, but it scares management. It's like, why do you need all these tools? Why do you need Python and Java and NPM, and why? Well, for me, the answer is pretty straightforward, but for decision makers, it might sound a bit weird. So just keep that in mind and don't freak them out. Last but not least, should you Docker everything? This is, again, our personal finding. No, don't do it. Sit down and have a think exactly what it is you're trying to Docker. We had an experience where we literally put a monolith inside a Docker container and thought this is going to scale elastically. No, it totally did not. Yes, so to sum up, we believe Kubernetes in Elastic Beanstalk does not solve the fact that you have shitty applications, or we have shitty applications, and we firmly believe DevOps is culture. Thank you.
Okay, that was a very inspiring presentation. So probably somebody has questions. Oh.
Hello. So I would like to ask, like you mentioned, what you are talking about enterprise IT and those tooling, which is kind of majority of those are open sourced, yeah?
Yes.
So do you think that all those tools are ready for the enterprise? How they are mature enough to run in enterprise environments?
Yeah, I think that That's an interesting question. In short, yes, I believe so. But I would sort of counter and ask, like, what makes enterprise special? Why do we consider if this will work only for an enterprise that it is production grade? Because I believe, sort of the startup mindset, you wouldn't really think like that. You would say, this works for us now. Let's do it. Where I think enterprises are a little bit skeptical is there is sort of a long-winded procurement process, and you want to buy the right thing. You want to make sure you evaluated all the right options. There is no silver bullet in that, I'm afraid. I would say yes, these tools are definitely ready, provided you have the right team. Working with procurement can be annoying, but I think if you show that you can work with the tools, you're making the choice specific for your needs, then I think you should be okay. For us, we generally pick open source. We try to avoid procurement altogether.
Somebody else? Okay, I have a question.
Yeah.
What do you think is the main disadvantage of using Jenkins?
The main disadvantage of using Jenkins? Well, I think Jenkins 2, the biggest disadvantage, and quote and tweet this please, is Groovy. The DSL is written Groovy. Stay away. Just kidding. But I think there's no real disadvantage in that sense. But I still don't see why the community went with Groovy. I think it's a strange choice. Yeah. I don't know if that answered your questions.